Okay, is it working? Yeah. So that concludes the part of the morning where we deal with energy and electricity. We're now going to move on to mobility. And it's Jan, who's our mobility editor. It's a very topical topic at the moment, especially with the discussions about banning or not banning the internal combustion engine, which is one of the big causes of global warming. Why is this such a topical subject at the moment?
Good morning, James. This is probably one of the key issues that the EU is facing right now. A couple of years ago, the EU agreed that by 2035 they would phase out the sale of new CO2 emitting cars. It was a really difficult thing to get that agreement, and in the subsequent 2 years, there's been a sort of a rising political backlash. We've seen right-wing and populist parties campaigning very strongly against it. Parts of the car industry are very strongly against it as well. There's a push to ensure loopholes that allow the continuation of the internal combustion engine, and the car industry is also screaming for relief from Trump tariffs, from Chinese competition. So it all comes together into a huge issue of how do we save one of Europe's key industries while also meeting climate targets.
Yeah, so very, very political, very similar to the themes we were just talking
exactly.
about. So, yeah. Well, it sounds like a great discussion, so I'll let you get on with it.
Great, thanks very much.
Cheers.
Good morning, and welcome to our panel, which is Trouble on the Road, EU combustion ban faces setbacks. And so we'll see just how big those setbacks are. I kind of laid out when talking to James broadly what we're going to be talking about, and what we're hoping to do in this panel is sort of take the temperature of where we are on the 2035 initiative, how much backtracking is going to have to happen, and the bit of the politics around it, and sort of the state of the car industry and kind of what it means for Europe's car industry. I'd like to welcome William Tots, the Executive Director of Transport and Environment, Jens Gieske, the EPP Coordinator on the Transport Committee, and Lucy Matera, who's the Secretary General of Charge Up Europe. Unfortunately, we won't be joined by Arthur Corban, who is the business and transport advisor to Stéphane Séjourné. And that's a little bit too bad, because I was hoping to, I would have asked him recent comments from the Transport Commissioner, Tzitzikostas, were that the Commission's automotive package, which was supposed to be landing on the 10th of December, now will be delayed by several weeks, potentially into early next year, and just try to get a sense of what's actually going on in the Commission and why this delay is happening. So maybe I'll just jump to you guys. If you could maybe each of you give me a quick sort of sense of the state of play of where we are on 2035. Is the whole initiative in danger, or are these just sort of screams, moans, and squeaks, but we're actually basically on track to get this thing through? William.
To get the proposal out, you mean?
To get the proposal out, and then to actually meet the target, to basically end the sale of new CO2 emitting cars in 10 years' time.
Well, they're two very different things. First, I'll say something about the process we're in. I was in the room when Ursula von der Leyen announced to the car industry that she would deliver an automotive package by the 10th of December. That was in September. I can tell you that, as far as I know, nobody in the Commission was working on the assumption that they would need to do this in the next 2 months. So basically, the whole system was not prepared for such a high-pressure, short-term delivery. And I think we're seeing the results of that. And I think one of the problems that the Commission has had is that the auto industry said, we want a proposal now. And then the Commission said, okay. And what do you want in the proposal? And then the industry said, well, we're quite divided on that. And that is, of course, making it difficult. And I guess that's why we're now seeing delay.
Just the scale of what they try to do is just...
Also because there's some really big decisions that need to be made. Do we stick with 2035, yes or no? What are we going to do in this industrial policy? Do we want local content, yes or no? Do we want it everywhere or just in 10% of the market? What is it, local content? What does that even mean?
Right.
Those are huge industrial decisions, so I think it's normal that it takes time to get to consensus.
Jens, what's your read on what's going on with the package and why there's this delay?
So first of all, I had the same expectations than you. I came today to Politico to check with the Commission what will happen next week. Now we have the same problem. Unfortunately, Commissioner Tzitzikostas yesterday in the Tran Committee was like, it might be next week or it's in January, so there is the way of postponing something. Of course, and I agree with William, it's a huge task because it's not just CO2 standards for cars and vans, it's the corporate fleets, it's battery booster, it's type approval, and you have many things on the table. I think now we have had industrial dialogue with the Commission for 12 months. I hope that Commission listened well. So that they are ready to deliver. So, of course, as a father of three, it's before Christmas always a question of expectation management. The Commission might disappoint us before Christmas, but nevertheless, then they have to deliver in January, and we still have high expectations. I just want to make the reference to our position paper from EPP, which we made 1 year ago. And there was just 1 point out of several which the Commission delivered on to avoid the penalties. So we have still high expectations on the package.
This was to do with the emission standards that kicked in 2025, to spread that over 3 years.
The flexibility and the new calculation over the 3-year period in order to avoid the 10.5 billion which the car industry was faced in 2025.
So what were some of the other key asks that you had for this, for the auto package?
For the auto package, of course, if it comes to CO2 standards, cars and vans, we want to have a broader approach. From EPP, we are fully aligned with the main street being electric, but for the side streets, we need other solutions. It is always difficult to talk in Brussels about technology neutrality, but of course, we see that it's not just electrification only, but other fuels which should be recognized. And that is the package where we want to see the flexibility. So we need, in order to help the industry for the transformation, we need some flexibilities for 2035.
And Lucy, you've got, what's your read on the delay in the package, and what are you kind of hoping to see in that?
I think the Commission is trying to get a better sense of the politics at the national level. We have a strong sense of what is the German position now, that is clear. But then that's one out
from the letter that...
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the discussion in the coalition. And then what the rest of the EU think, that's what they need to figure out. So that's going to take a few weeks, probably. What are we hoping to see? I think as much as possible, an understanding that investors have made decisions on the basis of the framework, and they have legitimate expectation, then they will see the returns they expected when they made those decisions.
You mean that the investors are seeing a decarbonized car sector and are kind of investing that way, so changes to that trajectory will obviously affect their...
Alter their trust, yes.
Right. You mentioned politics, and we've certainly seen I think a rising push against 2035. Some people calling for scrapping it. A lot of things like the German letter to the Commission President calling for tweaks and changes to 2035. Part of that is done by the EPP as well. The EPP has a position on that. Why do you think that the politics now are sort of turning so negatively against the 2035? And maybe we'll start with William.
I think one of the worst things that has happened to this file is that it has turned into a sort of a culture war. You're either in favor or against, and I think it's bad for Europe and for its industry, because this is not an internal European culture war. It's a techno-industrial race, and we're in that race with China and the United States. And so I think the big question for the auto package in the next year is, can we, as Europe, with the lawmakers, with the industry, can we come together and sort of reaffirm our commitment to that we want to be in that race and we want to win that race? Because for me, we can have a discussion about combustion engines with advanced biofuels and frankly, all of this is fairly marginal to the transition. The future is electric and it's automated. And so those are the technologies that you need to focus on. And so if you want to compete, then you need to put in place an industrial strategy that allows your companies to compete with BYD and others who are also strongly supported in their domestic markets. And so you can't do that if you're constantly infighting about whether or not this is actually a good idea.
Do you think that you mentioned the culture war, that it sort of feeds into broader political context? Did the Commission make a mistake by selling this initially, at least, as a climate change effort that was part of the EU's decarbonization push, and not as a crucial step to ensure competitiveness and a sort of long-term future for the car industry and jobs and that sort of thing? Was that a mistake in the way that was pitched?
My recollection of what happened when this proposal was made is that, of course, it was part of the Green Deal, but it was always understood that this was part of an industrial strategy too. And so people say 2035 was hugely controversial when it was adopted. I can tell you that I was surprised at how consensual the discussions actually were. There was a lot of support, and the reason why 2035 was adopted was not because a bunch of NGOs said it has to be done. There were also a bunch of car makers and other big industries that said this is a good idea, and there was quite a lot of support in Council. I think even the Italians supported it at the time.
Right. So. Jens, what's your read on the politics of 2035? There is an effort, I guess, as you go further right politically and get more towards the sort of far-right parties, calls to absolutely abandon the 2035. Why this appeal to the internal combustion engine? Why not simply a recognition that, as you said yourself, that the future is largely electric? Just stop the fighting around the margins and just sort of go fully electric.
So in a way, I do not understand the question, because we as EPP, we do not change our position. We have had this position in the whole process. We are not going far right in saying we want to have a change on the ban of the combustion engine. This has always been our position, so we are quite firm on that. And we have a different political approach. We think that the ban is not the right political tool. And of course, we see that the side effect of the one-sided ban of the combustion engine, just going electric, there is a collateral damage. We talk a lot about greening industry and having a competitive industry. But the side effect of this legislation was that our industry is not competitive and we are very weak. So, if I talk to the unions in that sector, big suppliers, in the last Strasbourg session, I had the honor to speak to the union bosses from Mahle, ZF, Bosch. They count for more than 50,000 job losses. Of course, it has a lot to do with the combustion engine. But now the demand, and this is something where now union and industry is unified. In Germany, we have IG Metall, the unions, and VDA. This is the industry, ACEA in Brussels. And they have a common paper, and then they really state, now you have to change something. We need to get rid of this one-sided ban. We have to take a broader approach. And of course, I listen to unions, to industries, and finally, there is an agreement in the government in Germany, which is Christian Democrat, my party, Friedrich Merz party, and the socialists. And they together, in a way, Merz wrote to Ursula von der Leyen, now we need to change on the legislation. And it's not just the CO2. Of course, this is something which has not been discussed in Brussels. We talk just about the CO2 standards. I'm in favor that electrification will be a success story. So we have to talk about the AFIR. the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation. We have more than 65% loading infrastructure, but just in Germany, France, and the Netherlands. But we have to have 100% in Europe, and then electrification can fly. So if we open CO2 standards, at the same time, we should open AFIR in order to have a holistic approach. But we just talk about corporate fleets, where we come later perhaps too, which is not the right approach, I think.
That's right up your alley, Lucy. What's your sense of where Europe is in building up the infrastructure if there is this pressure to go electric? Are we on track, and as Jens mentioned, across the continent, or is it just sort of very patchy, and so it's difficult to make that argument right now?
So AFIR is actually coming up for review next year. I'm sure you know that, and I'll be happy to give you a more detailed answer. But to go back to your first question, what is very striking to me is that the discussion, the loss of political trust that we're seeing is happening at a really strange time. If you're talking to EV drivers, right, and you ask them, are you happy with your product? What's going to be your next purchase? 97% would tell you, yes, I'm going to stick with EVs, right? Then, you go to a company like SAP, German software giant. Well, the fleet manager has just decided from 2026 onwards, we're only going to buy BEV. That's it. That decision was not made by the head of sustainability or some weird stuff like that. No, it's made by the fleet manager. Why? It's cheaper, right? So you have a case where we're winning the experience. That's not even a contest. We have a perfectly decent prospect of winning the economics, and at the same time, somehow we are losing the politics. And that is, I think, a little bit the paradox that we have to navigate. There are genuine concerns that have to be addressed, but I also don't want us to underestimate the strength of our own automotive industry. Those companies have been around for over a century. There's really deep brand loyalty. People are very attached to those brands. Up until now, the Chinese car makers didn't have a lot of competition in Europe, and now they do. Now the European car makers are bringing some really, really good models. I was at a dinner with Oliver Zipse, the CEO of BMW last night, and he was saying, you know what, my new EV, the one I introduced in Munich a couple of months ago, we have the highest order in the history of BMW. People are buying it before even they've touched it, right? And so we have to navigate those tensions, the appetite from the consumers, the economics that is being put in place, right? And that political trust that is being eroded. And that, I think, is the retention to look into.
Great. William, you were not thrilled with the letter that came from the German government to the Commission. What's your read on what the EPP is pushing for, and that general pressure to have some loopholes or outs in the general electric or zero carbon push for 2035?
Look, I think the best thing would be for us not to open the legislation and to focus on all the enabling stuff around it. So the charging, the batteries, etc., etc. That is, as a matter of fact, when the automotive dialogue was launched, that was kind of the idea. Let's have a discussion about what we need to make this transition work. From day one, the car industry said, no, we want to talk about the CO2 standards, we want to change the rules. Now we will have the package. So if you ask me, what we need is a package that helps Europe succeed both on climate and on industry. That's where I think the corporate fleets is going to be extremely helpful, but that's also where the Industrial Accelerator Act and the local content requirements for the battery supply chain are going to be essential. The German letter and the EPP, well, first of all, I have a lot of respect for the biggest political group.
Next to me. We're almost friends.
We're almost friends, yes. No, I think the question that the EPP and also the German government need to ask themselves is, do we want to give a little bit of flexibility and then make sure we get the whole framework right, or do we want to open this whole thing up and completely change the direction of travel? Because if I look at the position of the car industry, of ASEA, what it is actually asking for is to reduce the 100% target to a 50 or a 40% target. That is completely different, industrially speaking. Are you trying to become really good at this? Do you want a battery supply chain in Europe? Do you want tens of billions of euros in investment and subsidies? Or not?
How did you react to TNE's position to the German letter, and what do you think of that? Of the idea that we shouldn't change or tweak the 2035 goal, but maybe the enabling areas around it is what the effort should be on.
Well, we do not plan a revolution for 2035. We do not want to. We are very ambitious on our climate goals. We want to deliver. But part of the solution could be that we have a broader approach on technologies, and especially biofuels could play a role. For example, TNE is totally against. It's always the argument of planning security, but from our point of view, the decision to ban the combustion engine has been a mistake. So we want to have the flexibility to react and to correct the mistake. This is what we are doing, and then we have to put it right. I think we are aligned if it comes to the enabling conditions. On the infrastructure, it's loading infrastructure to be ready in Europe. And of course, there's the prices. The price question is very sensitive. We talk always about affordability of mobility. And then the reality in Germany, you pay for 1 kilowatt if you do a fast charging up to €1. So this is the opposite. Then you have easier. It's cheaper to go with your combustion engine than with electrification. But the promise was it will be smart, renewable, and affordable, but it is not. And there we have to go into the prices. For example, the reality in Germany is on the industry price. We have a certain approach now to get preferred rates for industry, but not for loading infrastructure. But that would be an enabler if obviously it's more efficient, the car, and if it's cheaper, then the consumer will decide in that direction. That's for sure. I want to guarantee that the new package sets the right priorities. And if it comes then to the corporate fleets, which would be one part of it, so unfortunately the Commission is not present, but at least they work on it, there the EPP is very hesitant, because we do not think from European level we should have the certain threshold, you have to buy 60 or 70 or 80% of your cars electric only. That is a question of market economy. The consumer has to decide. And if €6 car at the airport, if all the people wait for the electric car, he will simply change the fleet and say, okay, the demand is there, I have to change it. This happens within 12 months. That is not a problem. But not because Europe says you are forced to deliver 60% electric cars in 2065. So we come from the market economy approach and not from the we know it better and then we have planned economy. I do not like to have all those numbers and then you get that and what. In Germany, we, with studies from T&E and others, okay, you can have 15 million electric cars in 2030. So then let's not look on the studies, but on reality, we have 2 million. If this was true, 1st of January next year, we have to just approve electric cars, which simply will not happen. So this shows we need flexibility, and this is the way we work on.
Just before we go into fighting between the almost friends, I'd just like to
that was a fight.
to ask Lucy, what's your stand on the corporate fleet measure, and how important is it to the broad electrification? I guess one of the ideas is that you then create a more viable second-hand market and sort of enable deeper market penetration by doing that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. It has a lot of potential, let's say, because it's you have a lot of corporate cars essentially in the EU, and then as you said that. That moves to the second-hand market, so that can create a good pipeline of second-hand vehicles at a lower price. For us, from the EV charging side, it would be really important to have an ambitious proposal, whatever the shape, whatever that looks like, helping the fleets electrify to sustain EV demand. And we think it's important that the car makers have support for the demand for their EVs, essentially. Why do we think that is important for our business models? Well, in our sector, there's a metric that is used, which is the utilization rate. It just says how much your infrastructure is being used, right? If you go to Germany at, let's say, Ionity station, right? It's a big German company. They do fast charging along highways. Stay there for 24 hours at that station along the highway. You're going to see between 2 and 3 EVs in that 24-hour window charging. Right?
That's it.
That's it. So that's not a lot, right? And of course, with that kind of numbers, you can imagine what the profitability of the sector is today, right? We are not profitable yet. We will be profitable years down the line. And the sooner we get there, the happier we will be. But therefore, any opportunity to increase, to improve EV volumes, that's something we would welcome, regardless of the instrument, regardless of the tools. We find that fiscal tools are actually really good to do that. But there's so much potential. There's only 2 countries in Europe where fleets, corporate fleets, electrify faster than passenger cars. That's Belgium and Italy. And that's a little bit counterintuitive, right? You would expect fleets to go faster than passenger cars. So lots of potential, and for us, we would welcome an ambitious proposal.
Great, thanks. And you wanted to hop in on...
On the corporate fleets. I mean, the corporate fleet market in Europe it's so big. It's 60% of the market. If we could get that part of the market to accelerate, it would be a key part of our industrial strategy, and it would guarantee that there's a big market where there's demand for the great products that our car makers are producing. There's now a debate as if Europe would impose on small companies all over Europe a mandate, and if you don't do this, we'll come and hit you with a stick. That's one possibility. There's also another possibility, and that is that Europe asks all the member states to achieve a goal of 60-70% EV penetration in the corporate fleet market by 2030, and that those countries use the tools that they have at their disposal nationally, i.e. company car tax, or if you want to be like the French, you do a regulation. And we see in those countries that do it, that this actually moves the market, and it's very good for European producers. I'm Belgian. In this country, BMW is the biggest car company. Strange, by the way, that a premium brand is the biggest car company. But that's entirely thanks to the company car tax, and the share of EVs in our fleet went from very little to 40-50% in just a few years. So if we could Europeanize that scheme, you could say the same thing, by the way, about the Dienstwagensteuer. This is essential for Volkswagen and the ID.7. If we could Europeanize this scheme, our car makers could plan their production against stable fiscal incentives, and that is what I think we should try and achieve with the corporate fleets. And so if we don't like command and control, let's do something that is a bit closer to sort of your political way of operating. Would that be acceptable then?
Yes, of course. But my problem with the corporate fleet is that we do not want to have the mandate from the European level, because we recognize that there is no European market. There are different national markets and different approaches. And you have the tax regime, the Dienstwagensteuer in Germany, where you get incentives for your car company. So if it's owned by the car, you get a certain reduction on your taxes. That is something which is successful, but you cannot then regulate at European level. Where we are not totally against is to incentivize at national level. This would recognize the principle of subsidiarity. In that direction, we could work. So let's check what the Commission comes out with, and then we have always the possibility to do slight amendments in the process.
Great. We do try to include the audience, and I think that we have somebody with a microphone somewhere. And if you have a question, if you just can put your hand up, and we'll try to take a couple of questions from the floor. Not seeing any hands, but I am also getting blasted with lights right in my eyes, so I may be missing. No. Okay, if you do have one, I'll be checking in a second if you do come up with a question, and we'll absolutely take that. There's a question to Jens. When you talk about the flexibilities and the pressure that the car industry is under, does that not create a long-term danger for the European car industry? Because if we're sort of focused on the European market, you could make an argument that there does need to be some loopholes for the combustion engine. But if European car makers are going to have to compete in Brazil, in Thailand, in other countries where the Chinese have wide open access, they're selling very cheap EVs, that a European combustion engine car, there's zero market for that sort of thing, so that you're actually creating long-term problems for the European car industry rather than forcing a faster electrification where they can actually compete head-to-head against the Chinese in third countries.
So in third countries, there are many countries, they do not have any ban of the combustion engine. We do a lot of free trade agreements, and there we try to create opportunities for our car companies to sell cars. And from my point of view, it's better to ride a European efficient combustion engine than to have an Havana effect to drive with old cars. So that is not a problem for the moment. So we should guarantee that the transformation is successful, and in a way, the companies need the money. They do make money with combustion engine, and so they have the money for the transformation. But if you do the electrification too fast, you run out of money and you have no proper business model. So in a way, it's good that we work on the free trade agreements, for example, Mercosur, and then we sell our cars to Brazil and Argentina. That's a good idea.
Lucy, what's your sense of how competitive European car makers are, especially on the electric side of things, against the Chinese? Is there price, tech? The Chinese seem to have really moved forward very, very fast. Is there a danger that the European car makers will simply lose all non-European markets?
I think we're seeing that shift that I mentioned earlier. Chinese car makers didn't have a lot of competition, in the entry segment, right, like the lower price segment before, and that those models are actually arriving. You will see a lot of them next year. There's already plenty of them that came on the market in the EU in 2025. We can't really, we're not deciding in isolation. There are market fundamentals. The market is moving regardless of whether we like it or not. China is not going to hit the pause button, regardless of what we decide in the EU. They're going to continue to innovate. There will still be 45% of EV sales by 2030. The price of batteries is going to continue to go down. Those are market fundamentals that are not going to change. And so I think the question is more, we cannot stop that. The question is, how do we navigate those waters when they become choppy? But that's not where the discussion is today. And the discussion needs to move to, there's a lot of problems to how do we solve this problem? What about high energy cost? Why is it 2 or 3 times more expensive, those energy costs in Europe versus the US or China? What about labor productivity that has been plateauing for a decade, right? What about all of the simplification that was supposed to be delivered? Let's tackle those real problems while letting go of the illusion that we can stop the world around us and the transformation around us.
Great, thanks. William, there's also a question, as Europe electrifies, that we're not in control of the supply chain, that a lot of the tech is now Chinese, the critical raw materials are Chinese. What's your sense of the awareness of this problem and steps to actually combat it, to create a much more European supply chain, both in tech and raw materials?
Yeah, I think one, this is a real problem. Two, I think the awareness has grown incredibly in the last couple of years. I think the recent export controls on CRM, etc., that really focuses people's attentions, which is kind of strange because they did the same thing 15 years ago in Japan. So we should have been aware of this already. My take is that in the auto package, you should try and combine 2 things. One, a clear direction of travel on electrification. 2, a clear direction of travel on industrial policy. And I think local content can be a very important part of that, whereby you would tell the European car makers, when you procure those batteries, you need to make sure that those batteries are produced to some extent, some percentage in Europe and the supply chain as well. If you at the same time tell the Chinese that, yes, you can come and invest in Europe, but if you invest in Europe, we want you to onshore your supply chains, then we can have part of that battery supply chain in Europe. We will never have everything in Europe because we don't have as much lithium as Chile, for example. But we can onshore a lot of the midstream and the actual manufacturing. But that needs to be a conscious choice, because if you have a system whereby our car makers can simply buy whatever they want from China, where things are cheaper and often subsidized, then that's what they will do. So this is the other big industrial choice that needs to be made on the 10th or the 17th of December.
What's your take on this industrial strategy and the effort to try to make Europe more independent or more self-reliant on these crucial technologies?
I think it's a good approach to be more independent. We have already the Critical Raw Material Act, but of course the issue has to be addressed in the package. If it comes to local content, of course it's always a question. Normally it was the principle of the cheapest gets the bid, and now if we do these local content things, the cars will be more expensive. So we have to have a balance there. But where EPP and I'm as a trend Joint Coordinator, I'm very open to, in a way, create opportunities with the Green Deal. So if we want to protect our steel industry, and if we want to get the transformation done in steel industry, there should be a recognition, a reward. If you use the green steel produced in Europe, that should be accounted on your CO2 goal. That is something where we are very much in favor, and that would really create opportunities for our industry. Now it's difficult with China. There is a lot of overcapacity, and we try to work with additional tariffs, but of course every measure has a countermeasure, and then you have this kind of warlike situation, which is not good. But a situation, for example, in Lower Saxony, Salzgitter, they want to transform the production. And of course, in Salzgitter, Volkswagen is not far away. If Volkswagen could use the steel produced, the green steel made in Europe, that would be a perfect story where the green industrial strategy works in practice for the industry.
And so the idea would be that this coming auto package would include incentives like that to force or to encourage.
I discussed this with the steel industry, and we have certain ideas. I circulated this, I discussed it with the Commission, and they discussed it. I hope this will be part of the package. If not, we are ready to do an amendment.
Great. And for your industry, how important is it to onshore the technology, and how much of a threat do you see that sort of much cheaper Chinese production?
Well, essentially agnostic on that question, because for us, the business model, essentially you make money when an EV comes and charges at your station. Mm-hmm. That's voilà. I think the general thinking would be, it's a transition. It's a lot to ask of the European car makers. Let's make sure we don't make it harder for them. And so, I'm taking note of, their caution around this discussion, and they're flagging, global supply chains are complex, they're deeply integrated. Let's keep that in mind and not pile difficulties on top of the other, one on top of the other, as we already asked them to, electrify their offer.
Great, thanks. The conversation so far has been very electric. What's your stance on synthetic fuels, biofuels? Should there be an option for that in the future for the car industry?
I have only 5 minutes to fight about this.
That's not fair.
Wow. You want to go first?
No,
or should I go first? Okay.
Go for it.
I think it's very interesting that we don't talk about e-fuels anymore for cars. This was going to be the great savior of the combustion engine, and now it's barely mentioned anymore. And there were a couple of people, including us, who said for a long time, this is never going to work because it's inefficient, it's impossible to produce at scale, and you have a better alternative. Okay, so I think there's a growing consensus that e-fuels for cars, it's not going to happen. Actually, we're trying to do it for aviation. As you know, we have an ESAF mandate. And we're finding that it is pretty challenging, even if you have a direct mandate on the fuel suppliers to produce this stuff and a mandate on the airlines to actually to uplift it. So e-fuels, I don't think so. Biofuels, it's interesting. Now we're talking about advanced biofuels. There's a report on the advanced biofuels that we import in Europe and we put in our planes. 70% of the stuff, actually almost 80% of the stuff, is used cooking oil coming from China and Southeast Asia. This is palm oil with a certificate that says we have used it at least once. The other 20% is animal fat, so that's waste from dead animals. So this is advanced biofuels. Maybe to the extent that it is sustainable, we should use it, and then we should use it in aviation and shipping. But the idea that you can scale up waste-based biofuels, animal fats, and used cooking oils, which are all imported from Southeast Asia, and then blend them into your combustion engines, highly efficient combustion engines, and that this is the future of your car industry? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's a good idea.
Yes. So, now finally we have the controversy. We have a totally different approach. If we want to deliver on the principle of the neutrality, we have to recognize all fuels, and this could be facilitated via a carbon correction factor. So let's see. And I totally share your argument on e-fuels are too expensive and they do not exist. So there is no reason to ban them. So just let the market decide, let consumer decide. But this kind of, we have to ban everything, it's not our approach. So if it flies, let's fly. The promise was that electrification will be possible for 20 cents a kilowatt. Now I pay €1. So do not believe in numbers, let market decide, and then consumer will take electric car. That is our take on that. So let's see what the proposal brings. We are open to recognize fuels, and especially if you have the potential to reduce CO2. This is a good argument for existing fleet. Then you have direct effect on the climate, and that is something we want to do. So let's deliver on that and not to, in a way, continue with the controversy, because finally we want to bring the things together. After the legislation, I will promise next year, Christmas, we are friends, and the thing is done.
Thanks very much. We're almost at the end of our time, and I'd like to maybe just ask a final question to each of you. Time travel, 10 years from now, 2035, what is Europe's car industry look like? Is it basically a wasteland with a few Chinese assembly plants, or is it actually a functioning industry which continues to be one of Europe's largest? Lucy, why don't you start?
I'm going to do something that I hate, which is I'm going to derail your question to have a chance to respond to MEP Giesecke, who was concerned about the level of infrastructure and how that is concentrated. So you were mentioning 75% of the EV charging infrastructure in 3 countries, France, Germany, the Netherlands. That's actually a lower figure, but that is fine. Then the question is why, right? Why? Why is the EV charging infrastructure in those 3 countries? Here is a question. You're going to establish a business, right? You have a service to offer. Where are you going to offer it? Where there is demand, right? Makes sense. PPE is market-driven, so are we. The demand is in those countries, so are we. Right? It is that basic. If you have a large number of customers in those countries, which is the case today, we're deploying there, right? And so if the question is, why are there fewer chargers in Bulgaria that has an EV penetration of 0.3% compared to Denmark that has an EV penetration of 10%? That is because you have more EV drivers in Denmark. That's simple.
Great. And your view on the future of the car industry? Any future, no future?
I feel confident because I think our car makers have enormous strengths. I think they're at a pivotal moment in terms of their offering. They're bringing much cheaper models. That's going to help them a lot. As I said, a lot of brand loyalty. I don't know for you, my parents are French, they only bought Peugeot, and I will only buy Peugeot for the rest of my life. If you have the chance to, buy a Chinese car or a German car, if you're German, at the same price, which one are you going to choose? Once the price is the same.
Yes, because we will have a very smart revision of the CO2 standards for cars and a holistic approach on the car industry. In 2035, the people will say, because of that proper legislation, the car industry is still alive.
William.
I sit on the Sustainability Council of a large automaker, so I see from the outside and also a little bit from the inside how big the transformation challenge actually is. And it goes much beyond the CO2 standards. These are old industrial conglomerates built on the technology that was invented 130 years ago. And now they have to transition the next 10 years. This is a huge transformation. I think if we want those companies to be successful in 10 years' time, they'll be different. It will not be the same as today. I don't think we can promise that. It would be nice, but it's not going to be the case. But if we want them to succeed, we need to give them a clear direction of travel, and we need to give them a supportive framework that allows them to compete against companies in China and the United States that are really, really very good.
Thank you very much for the panel. Our time has run out. So I think the main takeaway is that it's not a disaster for the European car industry, but it is an enormous challenge. And I think also, both politically and economically, that if Europe does this correctly, it can have a vibrant car industry 10 years from now and in the future. If this is a mess, there's huge political and economic problems facing the continent. So if you can please just stay seated, and we will have the next session, Green Fleet or Red Flag, Europe's Race to Decarbonize Trucking, and that will be moderated by Martina Sapio, who will be coming on stage after a quick stage change. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.